introduce himself. Yeah, then when Mohammed introduces himself, he'll also share his screen, and then he'll drive from there and take us through, I guess, the presentation for today, right? So for everyone on the call, my name is Tasila Mafete. I am with Deloitte. I am specifically in the strategy and operations area of Deloitte, doing consulting within the financial services. And together with the Sustainability Office and Citizen Leader Lab, the collaboration has brought us to bring this series on financial management. I'm happy to be here. I think this is a worthwhile cause to contribute to the financial management of schools and ensuring that the work that is done enables you as the leaders of the different schools to keep thriving and doing the great work that you should be doing. So happy to be here. Looking forward to the sessions. Please make it engaging. Today really is where you guys should shine, right? In terms of asking us the hard questions and making sure that you get the most out of this. So thank you and looking forward.
Thank you, guys. And my name is Mohammed Udwal. I'm a chartered accountant by qualification, currently working with the CLA Strategy and Operations practice. I have a couple of years of experience across various industries, including insurance, financial management, and finance strategy. Glad to be part of the team. I do hope that I'm able to provide a little bit of insight from my background and what I've seen finance professionals, especially with the corporate role, have done in accordance with budgets and everything else that relates to financial management. So hope I'll be able to provide you guys with some insight. And like Tasila said, a lot of it will be understanding your context, what has worked for you versus what hasn't, and then we can kind of try to fill in the gaps and give a couple of practice items that might help you along the journey. So in saying that, I present myself. Sure, just a second. Okay, let me know when you guys can see my screen.
Yes, we are.
Oh, let me just put it in presentation mode. Perfect. So just to go through the agenda to give you guys a little bit of a sense of how we plan on running it. So we've done the introductions. What I'll be doing is a little bit of an overview of the budgeting process. And we'll then just focus on what I deem to be two of the key elements within that budgeting process. Like I said, I'll ask a couple of questions, you guys give me feedback, and then we can kind of chat through it. We'll also kind of get a sense of where you are in the process itself. If you need any further guidance, if there's any insight that we can give, we can work in that as well. We'll then take you guys through a little bit of a snippet on what we have seen work in terms of building the budget, and specifically how one can go about thinking about estimations, which is usually the crux of setting up that budget very well. And then lastly, we'll have a little bit of a discussion around questions that you guys have, what we've seen working, and that will be across the budgeting landscape. So just to go into the budgeting process, effectively what I've outlined is those key points that one goes into when doing budget. So in setting up a budget, it's super important to have strong process and policies in place to ensure that your budget doesn't falter along the way. So that obviously starts with adequate budget planning and doing a needs assessment. So that's just getting inputs from the relevant stakeholders, doing a review of your previous budget, and really defining what your priorities are for your specific school. You then can go into revenue estimation. So that's really determining or having ideas to what the government funding capability will be, what the level of school fees that you may expect to come in will be, and then determining, and that will be kind of based on your budgeted proposal or your budgeted costs, what other contingencies do you need to put in place to cover a gap in your profit or loss. And then the third step of that is really getting into the crux of it, and that is budgeting your costs. So understanding what your fixed costs are, what your variable costs are, what the contingencies you need to have in place, and if there are future developmental costs, how do you factor that into your long-term budget? Then obviously it needs to go through review, approval, and submission process. Budget then needs to be implemented. Important to then monitor and track your budget on a month-to-month basis. And then at the end of the financial period or the school period, it's really doing a deep review and understanding lessons learned from a budgeting process. So the key areas that we'll be focusing on today is really doing the revenue estimation, or maybe not so much that, but more the budget proposal and the proposed cost that you foresee and specific to the estimations therein. And then doing a little bit of a discussion around monitoring and tracking and a review and lessons learned. So I think with regards to monitoring and tracking, I put down some points there. So for monitoring and tracking, it needs to be monthly tracking, one needs to do various analysis and adjustments, including budget performance, what the recommendations are, and lessons learned. But I'd like to understand from the room, in terms of the monitoring that you have done, and I obviously wasn't involved in the previous session, but I now understand that monitoring was a big portion of that discussion. How have you guys found, or how have you guys gone about your monitoring? What insights have you gotten through that process, and really what takeouts do you have when you actually do monitoring and tracking of your budgets? If there's any information that you guys can share regarding that.
Okay, maybe while we do that, I see the audience that we have. I think this is nice and intimate. Then we can really ask some of the people on the call. So, Terence, maybe just a question for you there, if you do have a view. How has the monitoring and tracking process gone for you throughout the year?
Yeah, hi, Mafeti. I think, you asked the wrong person that question. We have been struggling. Our school service are largely impoverished community, the township community of Parkwood and Lotus River. And we have 6 informal settlements, and we have 2 girls' homes that we support. We don't select our students. So our budget, and when I was the principal, I always used to say, look, the budget that we have is not worth the paper it is written on. So the reason why I'm saying that is that when you go through the budget process and you have the budget proposals, and we do all of that, and we increase the cost by 8 or 10 or 12 or 15% for the following year, it is, I understand, a view for the following year. The problem that we have is that the minute we do that, because we're servicing an impoverished community, we find difficulty in raising funds through our fundraisers, because with our situation in quintile 5, we get a certain amount from the government, the department, and then we have to raise the difference in order to make our books balance. And so often we go through that exercise, that we look at what our potential fundraisers are to make up the difference, and then also to calculate how many students we have, and then from that we then calculate our school fees. And if we do that realistically, after having done the needs analysis for each department and so on, then there's absolutely no way that we can run a school with the limited funds that we're getting. So for me, it's about the question that I asked the fundraising committee, because I'm still in the governing body, that I asked the fundraising committee and the financial officer was, how does one reflect on your budget a negative? That was the question that I'd asked him, because there's no way that we will be able to increase our school fees to 5,000 Rand, because we're getting in 8% after COVID. Before COVID, we used to get in about 35 to 37% of our school fees. Our feeder schools are no fee paying schools, so the parents don't have a culture of payment of school fees. So we struggle to get in our school fees. So after COVID, it has dropped from that 37% all the way down to 8%, 11%, and then 8% this year. So there's a major struggle, and you cannot hand them over to the debt collectors, because you're just adding to the financial burden of a parent who really can't pay. Most of our kids are raised by grannies on various social grants and so on. So that's what I'm saying. I'm probably an exception to ask that question. My ulterior motive for being in this thing is to find out how do we really show a budget that is realistic with the monies that we projecting that we can get. So that's basically the question that I have. Sorry, it's a mouthful, but just to give you my context.
Okay, no, thank you for that, Darren. I see there's also posted in the group that it's not easy because they come across a lot of needs which they have to cover for and end up deviating for the budget. However, it seems even that they still don't go over the budget. So I don't know if you want to add to that. It sounds like priorities change, and you have to allocate whatever available funds there are, but you don't necessarily go over that. How are you guys navigating or managing that currently against what you've planned? And maybe what's also additionally interesting is that the budget is set up to achieve your school goals or objectives. Are you achieving the objectives that the school has set out for itself in its, annual general meeting? If you can maybe share from your side.
Okay, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. We are coming from a no-fee school, in Soweto, and majority of the parents don't even wish or can't afford to pay for CVs. So that's the area that we're operating from. But the little that we have, we try by all means to allocate it as per our budget. So the only problem is that the school that I'm at is 1968 school, very old. So you can imagine the dilapidating state of the infrastructure and all of those things. So as and when there's a breakage or the other emergency matters that we need to attend, we try within the budget. But then it's a problem because we are now implementing a budget that was approved last year. Remember, we've got a new SGP this time. So the new SGP are struggling to get to grips with the implementation of the budget that they were not involved in, especially the new parents. But then we have got power struggle issues, but we at least we are getting there with the support of the department officials and stuff. So at least we're getting there for now. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for that. Anyone else wants to share before we Mohammed carries on, I guess, with the rest of the questions?
Terence here again. We look for us. What we then did was is to go out and find partnerships, various partnerships. So we've got the Norwegian partnership where they give us money, over 120,000 rand, which they collect that side and they give to us this side, specifically for bursaries. And then we've got some of the other partners as well that would donate some funds. But like I'm saying, without that funds that we get and partnerships that we develop, there's absolutely no way we can run the school. And even those partnerships, quite a few of them have run dry after COVID because businesses are struggling as well to get back onto their feet. So so it's not always. I don't know the year before when I draw up the budget. I don't know how much money I'm going to get in the following year in order to keep us afloat. So it is with partnerships that we manage to keep our budget and cutting down, each department, each subject department, they give us their wish list. And then we say, okay, that is a nice to have. This is an absolute need. And then we cut their budget down to almost 75% in order for us to make the budget work. So the departments don't get what they require. Also, we need to pay for governing body posts. So we've got 2 governing body posts. Next year, we're losing 2 government posts and we're losing our 2 governing body posts. So that becomes extremely difficult because now you're going to have large classes of 55 to 60 at a high school in a township area that is difficult. So So, so that's basically how we've managed to get our budget to balance. And then, we get the auditor coming around, the financial auditor of the department coming around, and he give us a 97% compliance. But the compliance is about, robbing Peter to pay Paul, basically. And my problem is, once our partners dry up, then we're going to have a major issue. So hence, I would like to say now, how do we, in a budget, present a negative income, if you understand what I'm saying, a loss, basically, that the school is not a going concern.
Okay. Okay, I hear that.
Yeah, look, I think, Terence, what you said is quite profound, because a big part of this initial discussion was really understanding what is happening within the school and lessons learned. And it does seem as though, although I understand and I appreciate that it is challenging within your environment, the power that you have is understanding where these gaps lie. And the challenge then is about how to cover those gaps specifically. So I don't necessarily have a direct answer for your question, but coming from a finance background, the most important part of it is most realistically and accurately reflecting what the costs are and how to best manage that. With there being a loss position, and whether it is within the school environment or within corporate, that's where one of the biggest challenges come. And how one addresses that is similar to you speaking about your Norwegian partner bolstering some of the gap. That's about finding those revenue contingency strategies. So where there are gaps, how do we cover it, and how much more do we need to find or fund in order to cover those gaps? So this is a challenging one, for one that I don't necessarily have an answer for at the moment. But yes, I think in presenting a budget, oftentimes it's important to reflect as accurately as possible. I know one does need to provide a balanced budget, but when one kind of outlines the costs that you have, just ensuring that your escalations are as close to accurate as possible, at least gives you a good sense of how much of that gap you need to cover. But perhaps covering that gap needs to be a separate discussion.
Yeah. So and Terence, maybe what I just want to also pick Mohammed's brain on, I guess, to the larger conversation that we're having here. If I'm also hearing part of what you're asking or saying, how do we do it? Because when you say realistic, in the budget, it will always demonstrate the need, right? The area where you see a difference is when you compare it either to a past and say, last year around this specific line items, I maybe had it at this price or this amount. Now I need this amount, which is now a difference of, let's say, 8%, right? You're basically showing the realistic nature of that. But as you look at the numbers and try to tell a story, it always looks as if, oh, it's just a matter of increasing, right? I think for me, an element of how to communicate that would actually be in the cash flow, right? Which shows now a deficit. So it in your budget, it looks like a gap, which is true. But in your cash flow, which is, I guess, separate to this particular showing of your budget, but in your cash flow, that's where you actually say, on a month to month to month, my deficit is this much. And if I don't achieve these things as an imperative to what we're trying to achieve as a school, my deficit is growing, which is how do we, as a school, try to close or start to work towards closing that gap. And for me, maybe that's an important way of communicating. I think to your point, Terence, how do I bring that message across of the reality of what's happening in my organization? I think for me, the cash flow is possibly a way to communicate that, because then you're actually putting money that is constantly, basically you're going in debt if you don't raise enough money to achieve those elements and to drive your objectives. I think we can consider how to tell a story, a clear story, when you go communicate with the board for approval and you communicate with the parents as well. And I guess largely what you will then do with your partners and say, we're trying to achieve this, but our deficit is on a continuous increase, right? To tell a bit of a story, right? I don't know if it's something that makes it, to me, to show a negative, it would have to be in the cash flow.
Yes, and I think that's exactly where that negative comes through, and that's effectively your cash flow forecasting. Because typically when you do the budget, it is the income statement, so you kind of want to see whether you are you're breaking even, making a profit as an example, or loss making. But I think cash flow analysis is most important, especially within public sector and the schooling environment. It needs to be managed on a month-to-month basis, because in addition to asking for the funding, which becomes necessary at some point, you, regardless of how many cost optimization initiatives you put in place, you might find yourself in a gap, and you then think, okay, what is the way forward? It might then be about raising it to the SGB and asking for not that buffer, but that additional funding that might be required for the school. But I think most importantly is just ensuring that one monitors any variances, and with enough experience, try to forecast where these gaps may come in. So, for example, if it comes to purchasing stationery, you know that there might be a spike in the beginning of the year, and then those costs may go flat for a while, and then at some point again, every term there might be a spike. So it's firstly when it comes to budgeting and cash flow forecasting, it's smoothing that over so that you understand for every quarter, every term, what is that actual funding requirements. And I think that's an important way in which one needs to measure that. It's just about having a keen eye, understanding really what needs to be done, and then from there making a case for the kind of funding that one needs. I do though appreciate that it's not as easy as, well, I have a cost, I need money for it. That's obviously a much more difficult process than that. But if one is able to monitor it closely, it makes that conversation a little bit easier.
No, thanks, guys. I appreciate your insights. It makes sense. I haven't tried that aspect from the cash flow side, because like I was saying, you know, you rob Peter to pay Paul this month, and then next month you do it differently, and you pay somebody else just to keep the lines of communication open. But yeah, I hear what you're saying, and my colleague in Gauteng that mentioned about the new governing body, we also got that same similar issues. People get onto the governing body for the wrong reasons, and now what's it, next year they're having the local election, so that's another fight that we need to get involved in. But that's an aside. Yeah, it is a serious and difficult situation, because we're trying to give quality education to our learners, and having to lose the posts and having larger classes, we're going right back to gap education. But I mean, that's a story for another time. Sorry to take up so much of your time, but thanks for some guidance regarding the cash flow and the monthly deviation that we will be able to see, and then present that to the education department as well. Will strengthen my case to argue to get out of quintile 5. I don't know if you understand the quintiles, where they placed us in quintile 5 with all the rich ex-model C schools.
Yeah.
And so that is where we find ourselves. But thanks for the guidance. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tansu. Now, I think I still remember the case where you mentioned it's a zoning issue, where you're zoned in a fee collecting, but the community is not in a position to be doing that. I think I remember that case.
That's right.
Yeah. Ridwan, I see your hand is up. I don't know if you had a question.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to ask you, based on the monitoring and the tracking, we paused a little bit in our last session that we will try and have a template available to people. But be that as it may, for now, would your cash flow be part of that monitoring and tracking your budget to see if you're on track in terms of spending and income? Would the cash flow be part of that monitoring and tracking?
Yes, it would be part of that, right? So I think the monitoring, or the position of monitoring, right? You will have your budget document where you have a certain assumptions, and you say this is why we need an increase. Mohammed will speak to them now. It's maybe inflation or whatever this case. He'll speak about some of the specifics that sit in there, right? You'll have rationale. you will review it with within the school management, the SGB, and you will have a submission, right? Then in the month to month, you say, how much have I spent versus what I planned, right? That's one lens. The second lens is actually to say, how much cash do I have? So this is now saying what's sitting in the bank, what are my needs in this month, or again, it can be reconciled on a quarterly basis, but how much cash do I actually have? And can I actually cover all those bills that I need to pay, right? And some of them can be immediate. Yes, we do have some expenses that maybe aren't always immediate or always recurring, but something like paying for your rates and taxes, for instance, it's a monthly expense that you need to make sure that you cover. If you do not have cash to pay for that, I mean, we all know the challenge that comes with them not being able, for instance, having electricity because now you're not able to pay the municipality for that electricity portion. So the cash element, right, really is there to say you had a budget, correct, but now you actually have to exercise that expenditure. Do you have the money for it now, right? And you can look a little bit forward to say, given where I am and what I'm spending, will I have money to where I'm going to sort of anticipate and make a plan for that? So it is two different measures that you're looking at, but it's there to help you in different ways, right?
Yeah. And I think why cash flow forecasting is important is in certain scenarios, especially through fundraising activities, one might have more of a cash inflow than a cash outflow. And in forecasting what your cash needs might be down the line, be able to understand where best you can use that money to plug potential cash flow deficits that you may have further down the line. And it might be a more strategic use of that money, because I know there's always competing priorities within the system, but understanding that even if I am to give this department 20,000 of the 100,000 I make, it might then mean that I'm not going to be able to pay a bill in November of this year because there might be this massive cost that comes up, or we know usually at some point there is this cost that comes up. So I think cash flow forecasting is equally important, just to understand, ensure that you always have the cash on hand and that you never find yourself insolvent or having credit problems, if you want to put it that way.
Thank you.
I think, Mohammed, you can move to the next one. What I just want to voice over, and I think maybe for us, it has been a running theme, right? The budget is numbers, right? But there's always the strategic conversation that needs to be had around what the numbers are saying and managing, I guess, the responsibility that you have to actually manage the school, right? And I think that strategic conversation around where we're trying to take the school and what do we, as a collective of management then need to do, that for me is really where the heart of the conversation should be. Then you can work back to what are the numbers and what is realistic in that sense, right? But Mohammed, yeah, will take us through this part. And again, please feel free to ask us questions as we go.
100%. So effectively what I've done here is put together a kind of a dummy budget. And the core intention of putting down this information is really to understand what are the cost drivers behind each of the cost line items that one has, and what might be a potential escalation approach. And why that is important is oftentimes the mistakes I've seen being made when clients or individuals draw up a budget is that either they apply an escalation rate that's not necessarily backed by any real kind of science, or they don't do or go through activity of fully understanding what is it that drives this underlying costs, and through that understanding what the escalation will be on top of that. So effectively in determining each of these things, it really varies per cost line item that one may have. So for example, if you look at the norms and standards expenses, so that's your purchase of stationery, purchase of textbooks and materials, and municipal services. Those ones, oftentimes, or in my mind, the cost driver is when it comes to stationery, how many students are there within the school? what do we expect enrollment to be in the following year. So if it's lower, that number can be adjusted lower. If it's going to be much higher, then we know that number needs to be pushed higher. So that's an example. With municipal services, usually that's a tricky one because unless one has prepaid services, you only really understand what the bill is at the end of that specific month. But it's really about understanding how these services are being used within the school, and perhaps having optimization conversations with staff, with learners, in order to ensure that one minimizes those specific costs. I think for these norms and standards expenses, as I put them down, from an escalation approach, or how one needs to think about increasing that number, firstly, and the key item is always understanding what the CPI is, or the inflation rate. And then why have CPI plus there is also adding on top of that what we expect our suppliers to charge us as well. Because oftentimes, let's say the inflation rate is 5%. If I'm to buy stationery from supplier X, they're also going to pay that 5%, but oftentimes they mark it up by a specific percentage. So in real terms, one needs to think about applying an escalation of somewhere along 7.5%. And why I said that one needs to benchmark, it's really about going through an activity of understanding, okay, well, if supplier X gives me my stationery for a certain amount, if I'm to look at other suppliers or what other schools are getting it for, what is that number? And I can kind of adjust my budget in accordance with that. The obvious one is also the change in your number of students means that those specific costs change as well. Municipal services is a tough one because the increases in cost is really determined through the specific municipality. And I know in certain areas where if you have been zoned incorrectly, that those costs may be slightly higher than for other certain areas. But other adjustments that one needs to make in that regard is also, again, adjusting for the number of students. And then I put it down as number of classes, but it's really just understanding if there has been an infrastructure project where you've had the good fortune of being able to build additional classes and additional space on the school grounds, ensuring that when you budget for that, or once you've done that, your municipal services bill, you kind of adjust it for any other infrastructure projects that you've gone through. Second main one I have there is salary costs. Effectively, how one can think about escalating that cost is really just understanding your teacher to student ratio, because no, it's not always the case, but as your student numbers increase, and if you think long term, if that number does inflate by quite a bit, you need to then anticipate having more teachers and more support staff within the system, and that then escalates your costs. Going into operating costs, I think oftentimes I see that as being the easier one, but also the one that you have least control over. I put down a couple of examples, such as repairs and maintenance, computer repair upgrades, outings, and the rest. And effectively, one needs to evaluate that almost on a line-by-line basis, because repairs and maintenance might be a tough one, and that one cannot always anticipate when something is going to break. But what is important is understanding the age of your infrastructure. So, I mean, if you have had prefabricated classes for a very long time, and you know that these students are oftentimes working within the classrooms and it is prone to damage, then within your budget you need to kind of add a potential buffer for if that material that is worn thin may eventually break. I mean, back in the day when I was in school, we also had classrooms in prefabs, and I know that myself as a student, I was also a little bit reckless. So I know that these costs can be unexpected, but one then obviously needs to incorporate some of that potential cost within there. Things such as equipment upgrades and equipment repairs, again, very similar. One needs to understand what is the age of the equipment, and really doing what we call it like asset management, where one goes through all the equipment at the beginning of the period and says, okay, well, I can see this keyboard is starting to lose some of its keys. Maybe we need to anticipate for buying a couple of new keyboards before the actual event, because oftentimes those unexpected events were not planned for, which might seem like a contradiction, is what suddenly hits one's cash flow, and you find yourself in a position where these costs have jumped out at you, but but it may be because that initial planning was not as tight as it may have potentially needed to be. For things such as educational outings, one can again plan for those things. So understanding if last year we took 5 outings, are we going to kind of keep to that number? Do we need to reduce it to 4 or 3 because of constraints that we have? But then also for things such as educational outings and feeding schemes expenses, oftentimes we lump that as being a single expense. But if you think about those outings, there's various expenses that lie underneath it. So important is just to understand, okay, if it is an outing, using first principles and just breaking down that to say, okay, what are all of these costs? And let's think about if the fuel price has been good for a while in the news, are they expecting fuel prices in the future? And kind of budgeting that in at a more granular level. And then when you build that up, it gives you a better chance of getting a number that's as close to realistic as possible. But then you also have costs that are oftentimes out of your control, things such as insurance and maybe other unexpected expenses. What one needs to do there is really look at what I paid in the prior year and then applying what I call a CPI plus percentage on top of that. Again, that's again being what is inflation and in real terms, what do I expect this provider to start charging me? And again, that's usually in the range between 7% to some suppliers really do add a massive margin on that. So it'll be up to something like 11%. And I think that effectively covers the rest of it. So I think the key message out of that is when one does this budget, really sit back and on a line by line basis, think about if I have this cost, what is really driving this cost? And then based on what's driving this cost, let me just think through each one of those things that might then attack my costs and might increase it beyond what I had initially expected. And how one does this very well, if CPI oftentimes seems to be too low, then if you look at, for example, let's say insurance, if I use an example, just do a 5-year retrospective and say, okay, well, if I really do what I call CAGR, so the compound annual growth, you'll say, okay, but this really grew by 30% in the space of 5 years. So adding, and that's compounded. So adding something like 5% every year is not really going to get me there. That means that cost inflates or bloats a lot quicker than any other cost. So really do that retrospective, get an understanding of what these jumps are, and incorporate that into your budgeting so that, again, you don't just apply inflation, you apply what this cost increases may have been in the past. So I think, again, just to summarize what I've said, from general forecasting, focus on looking at what that annual inflation rate is, look at your student enrollment growth, look at, in terms of your supplier contracts, whether there's any clauses that say they'll escalate the costs, and determine when your contract comes to an end, think about how you can negotiate for better prices, if at all, and then think about what those year-on-year increases were in the past, and then apply those into the future. And then once you kind of get to a number, then you can think about, okay, I have my budget down. What are some cost reduction mechanisms that I need to start putting in place that kind of helps me reel in these costs? Because I get the sense that oftentimes you lay out a budget of X amount, I have 3.2 million a year, but then you don't always get that number. So then once you've kind of put together the budget, think about, okay, is there a way I can kind of start incorporating bulk purchasing agreement? How do I partner up with other schools in the area and get the best price from suppliers and say, okay, well, we're going to purchase bulk. In terms of cost estimation as well. So if you anticipate not having a large stationary cost this year, really think about, okay, well, in future, within limits, is there a way that I can start stockpiling these things to smooth over those costs? Because any spike in your cost, whether it's in the following month, in the following year, or 2 years down the line, is going to be the friction point where you struggle to get the necessary funding. And then the rest, I think, won't be new to you guys. Just try to go through utilities cost saving initiatives, do some preventative maintenance so that the cost is not as big at the end of the period. Look where you can get time and funding donated, where you can refurbish your equipment. Can you get group discounts as a school group, as an area, whatever the case may be? Can you share resources among schools? And the sponsorships is a tough one, and I think I've seen one question regarding that. And then just see within limits again, is there a way that you can build contingencies into your budget? Because again, our one oftentimes, especially in corporate, gets that financing is by ensuring that your costs are as smooth as possible. But again, once you have that spike, it's really difficult to say, oh, well, suddenly I have this cost. And so just try to keep that curve as smooth as possible. Yeah, and I think that's kind of my estimation and a little bit of information I can give with regards to the estimation. Are there any questions regarding that or insights that you guys would like to get?
Hi, Mohammed. Kiran again. If I look at
Yes.
your stationery for argument's sake, okay, and you're saying that is what you intend the cost per year. So I fail to see. I don't see the income aspect. But anyway, if I look at that, so what we would do under normal circumstances, for argument's sake, say I've got my stationery cost is 100,000 rand for the year. I've got 1,000 students, so I divide that by the amount, the number of students into the amount, and then my assumption is that each of the 1,000 students are going to be paying that amount in order for me to balance the budget. Am I right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, so now this is exactly where we're sitting with the problem, because now the students don't have the money, the parents don't have that money. So instead of me getting in 100,000, I'm now getting in 50,000 or 50. Yeah, let's use even numbers. So now I'm getting in 50,000. So already I'm 50,000 in the red. I'm sitting with an account of stationery of 141,000 that I'm supposed to pay, and the supplier is expecting to get his money. I'm sitting with the stationery, and my parents are not paying. So you understand why I say that the budget isn't what the paper is written on, because I'm assuming that is what I'm going to get. If I go back and I look at my last 5 years, or like I say, since COVID, how much money we have come in, and I'm saying this year, 2024, we at 8%. So then I'm really saying that I'm only going to get in 8% of the 141,000, and I'm expected to pay the balance from where? You understand that you understand the dilemma that schools sit with.
Yeah. I think that is really a tough one, and
So that's what I'm
I
saying.
think-
The budget then becomes an assumption. It becomes an assumption that this is what's going to happen. We're predicting this is what's going to happen, that every parent is going to be paying, and therefore this is the amount. If I realistically say, okay, fine, let's say for next year, that same 8% of parents are going to be paying the school fees. Now I need to push up that school fees or that stationery cost in order for me to cover the 141,000. And then what has been happening is that those same parents say, but we're being punished for those who are not paying. You understand the catch-22 you find yourself in. Because I can't now go and say, fine, 8% of my 1,000, so you guys are going to have to pay the 141,000 for argument's sake, or the 151 if I escalate it.
Yeah. Look, I think that's Terence, I think that's a difficult one, right? Because if in the approved budget from government, they approve, let's say, lower than what you've asked, right? That becomes really difficult, especially where I guess it's in both cases, right? Whether you are no fee or fee pay, right? In
Yes.
both instances, once it's not approved to the level that you want, not want rather, to the level that the school needs, right? Already that's a deficit that is hard to recover. And then we talk about where we say, especially where we have parents that need to pay the fees but are not paying the fees, right? In some instances, it'll be parents that can't pay the fees because of the zoning that they're in, right? So I think it's a difficult one to say where to get the money. I think for me, if we think about the first session we had, that fundraising conversation becomes important, right? And
Yeah.
fundraising is not, I think maybe it's something we can revisit in the new year, right? Because that fundraising component is where you really try to explore as many opportunities as you can to say, how can we keep the school running to offer the services that we need for the pupils or the students, right? For me, that's probably the only conversation that really helps, because government will also not just release budget because you have said we need an increase. They do their own assessment and they make a call around what they agree to. But for me, that fundraising element, I think if we give it some thought, there might be some creative ways that I think we can identify that really help the narrative, right? I see that we're past 4 o'clock. Are we able to maybe continue, let's say, for the next 10, 15 minutes? I see some people are starting to drop off as well. Maybe for the next 10, 15 minutes, I don't know if there's other key questions that the members would like to ask as we think about this and as we build this, right? Maybe for me, the question I'd like to answer to understand is where in the budgeting cycle are you, and what are some of the challenges you're experiencing? Maybe we can address some of those. I guess above and beyond the questions that we've already spoken to today. Peter.
Before you go to Peter to Sally, just a quick one
Yes.
from me. I will put the evaluation in the chat in the meantime before
Okay.
people drop off. And yeah, let's continue for a few more minutes. Allow 1 or 2 more questions. I'm glad you raised the issue of looking at potential fundraisers. There's been a request in the chat also for how to write a fundraising proposal. So if that's something that we could consider in the new year, how to draw up, how to write a winning, let's call it, let's think positively, a winning fundraising proposal, so we can get our principals inspired, because many of us have written proposals and we don't make the cut, so maybe it's the way we write it, maybe our pitch is not correct. So that's something you guys could consider, and we could maybe factor that in our first session in the new year as the year's
Yeah.
fresh. That will be delightful. So in the meantime, I'm going to pop the evaluation in the chat. Okay.
Thanks, Ridwan. Peter, Ridwan saved you to give you a few minutes to think about a question for us. Where are you in the process? What are some of the challenges that you're experiencing?
Thank you, Mafeti. Thank you, Ridwan. I'm in a unique position. I have a charity, and so I think I have utilized some of our partnerships and expertise to help us to understand our budget and maximize it. Our challenge is not so much the management of the budget. Is, I suppose, everybody else's challenge. It's generating the income.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So that is the challenge. And as you said, if you go on to the next, that would be helpful. There's always something to learn. Been in this space for a long time, but there's always something to learn. Yeah. So thank you very much. It's been very helpful. And I suppose once there is a constant flow, then it's easier to grasp some of the processes and the details, because you actually see and you have the money and you know what it's there for. It's a bit challenging when when you swing in on a prayer and a little limb, because I think, as Terence said, it goes from hand to mouth. You don't really realize actually it's part of that process. It's part of that discipline. It actually is better to put it and to track it through my cash flow than this. You're just trying to make it, you just want to make it through the month. You don't really see all those things in context and in detail at the time. But yeah, I think as there's more knowledge and there's more stability in terms of finances, you really get time to appreciate these disciplines, which are very critical, because one of the most important aspects of going to apply to a funder is your ability to show that the little you have, you are managing well, and that you are adhering to principles, financial principles. And that is critical, because a funder does not want to give you money if you don't know what to do and how to manage the little money that you have. I've always, before I go in, I would make sure that our financial statement has been thoroughly looked at by the people with the necessary skills and knowledge, so that when I do go to a funder, then the funder can have the confidence, at least, that you know what you're doing with your money. You must have a plan, even if you don't know, or even if you don't have the money, you must understand the plan, and the plan must be based on sound financial principles. So when you advocate that, the funder at least gets the idea that actually I can trust you with the money because you understand those sound principles. And I think that is what a lot of it has come out here. And the more you practice it with actual money, the more it becomes easier to share that type of knowledge. So thank you very much, guys.
Thank you for that, Peter. And you know, something that's sticking in my ear, or rather in my mind, about what you're saying is actually we have the challenge to cover the expenses and costs, right? And the very activity to raise funding is actually an additional responsibility, because wherever that funding is coming from, it comes with an expectation. It may solve your problems of the expenses. It may propel the school, or the organization to achieve its objectives, right? But for the management, it becomes an additional responsibility, rightfully so, right? That's why we choose the right leaders. But it's actually a very big responsibility. How do you manage people's money in a way that is satisfactory, in a way that demonstrates that you are exercising a responsibility in that caretaking role you have as a leader for that? So I think it's something that comes to sense, not to scare, but to conscientize that you actually need to demonstrate that I'm responsible with your funds, and I'm here to execute in the best in the best outcome for the students or for the pupils, and I guess with everybody involved assisting and supporting. So thank you for that note. Farida, where are you in the process? What are some of the challenges that you're experiencing? Ridwan, I see there's 2 minutes left to 10. Maybe we can close from our side. So look, I think from our side.
Sorry, Mafeta.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I've seen you got 2 minutes left. Sorry, one more question. I hear what Peter is saying, and I appreciate what he's saying, that you need to reflect in your budget that you are afloat, that you are solvent. So this is exactly the catch-22 we find ourselves in. Like I was saying, so we get a 97% compliance based on from the education department. And so when I apply to move out of that quintile system, they say, well, but you guys are doing okay. From the budget, they look at and they say, you guys are doing okay. But we are basically struggling day to day in order to make ends meet at the school. So if I'm saying the budget isn't actually worth the paper it is written on, it's obviously a guideline. You know, so for us, it's exactly that. Yes, you're presenting a budget that shows that that you are afloat, but in reality, you're not.
Yeah, and Terence, I think look, even if maybe Mohammed can add to this, right? I think for the specific position you're presenting, I think for me it's more of a question around the financial position, and I don't think the budget fully can tell that story on its own, right? If we want to talk about the financial position of the organization. I think there's a few other financial tools that help tell that story. The budgeting is a specific tool to address a specific view, scenario, and output. But I think if we're telling a full story, there's a few other tools that, to your point, will clarify, because the budget, you always try to meet the budget because that's all you have, right? And it will look like you're complying and therefore you're fine. But it's that tool is not the right tool to be telling the story that you're saying, which is actually we're not in a financial position to keep at the pace that we are, right? And I think maybe that's, I don't know, maybe it might not be part of the series, but maybe it's a conversation that we can conscientize around. How do you tell the school's financial story, or the financial position of the school? Might not necessarily be part of a series. We can just maybe highlight what that means. But the budget for sure will not tell you the full story. Historically, it can tell you what you've been doing, but it doesn't tell you completely the performance of the institution. Yeah, I think with that said, sorry.
Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you for that, Terence. Yeah, I think from our side, we always appreciate your involvement, your commitment, and your participation, right? We're here in that sense in terms of what really helps you on a day-to-day. I think what we've been doing with Citizen Leader Lab is understanding from your side, what are the pressing points. So I know Ridwan has put in the chat already, the survey. Please complete that. What it does, it makes sure that the conversation we sit and have here is most relevant and not just a topic that we want to cover based on financial documentation or financial conversations. So thank you again for participating. Do give us feedback, because that's how we actually make sure that we are offering you value. From my side, thanks Ridwan and the team for organizing this and making sure that the audience knows about it and they do attend. And I think thanks, Mohammed, for all the effort to drive this, to bring the type of content that we've put in front of the audience. Thank you again for making the time.
Yeah, thank you,
Thanks.
Ben. Before you sign up, from my side, also want to thank you two guys, Taseli and Mohammed from Deloitte, for continuing on this partnership with us and all the people who signed in. I guess our little hiccup, technical issues we had at the beginning maybe caused some people not to sign up for today. Maybe they didn't get a follow-up email, but we endeavored to do better. I'm excited about the fact that we could possibly in a new year, God willing, look at different modes of fundraising as well as fundraising proposals. I think that will be great. But a matter more at the end, and we have touched on it in the last session. Again, a request for some kind of monitoring tool. In the chat, we have a challenge with a monthly monitoring, and appropriate and easy to follow tool will be appreciated. That comes from Sibu Sisu. So, if you have something and you can email it to me, if you have something, or Mohammed, then when we send out our thank you email to everybody, we could possibly attach that just to give them an idea.
Okay.
I think we'll have to have a look, and then
All
if
right.
there's something, then we'll send it through.
All right. I think, yeah, for me, as a former principal, I always struggle with the cash flow. I mean, our department wanted a wage or cash flow wage, but nobody actually trained and showed me what a cash flow looks like and how you populate a cash flow. I had to figure it out myself. And even up till today, I'm not sure whether I did the right thing. So I would assume there's quite a number of principals who found themselves where I was, and maybe even up till today, I have no idea how to manage or implement the cash flow. So there are those little simple, easy tips from you will be very greatly appreciated. So guys, keep up the good work. We'll see you in the new year. And if we don't, all the happy, when you have a blessed festive season, stay safe and take care. Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you,
Terence.
Bye.
guys.
Thanks for your
Terence.
Thank you
insights.
very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Peter.
Bye-bye. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
But you're going to stay online just to complete the recording?
Yep. Oh, so
So that's fine.